mistake. So,
oh yeah, it's that, and I think whether again you're transparent. So for him, God is an external being that can see right through him to his very soul.
But I mean, also in salvation, it's also said that God actually also lives within us as well.
Yeah. But my point in terms of just how God might view you on this earth, is and for me, it's God lives within me as my very core essence. It's just my very core, and given that, it's there's a concept in philosophy called the Cartesian theater, and it means so you have vision input, you have auditory input, you have all these sense inputs. Mm-hmm. Well, it all gets amalgamated into one perception, and that's what perception is, the amalgamy of all of your senses. So what is it that actually views this and makes decisions premised on all of the inputs and all that kind of stuff? Well, that's where the Cartesian theater comes in. It's the idea, it's a thought experiment that right behind your eyes, it's every sense is being projected into one percept, and there's a little homunculus in there kind of watching it going, okay, do this, all right, pull that lever, all right, do this. That kind of thing. And it's just how this gets broadcasted to a subjective percept. Mm-hmm. And for me, in my view, that thing in there is actually the essence of the divine. It's literally if I try to lie to myself, you try to lie to yourself and you're like, that's not the actual case. Mm-hmm. I know that's not the actual case. That's that little divine in there going, that's not true. I have all of the data right here. That's not fucking true. I know you're lying to yourself. You're trying to lie to me, asshole. It's not gonna work. I know what you think. I know everything you think.
You're gonna stub our toe now.
So, I'm posing this question just because I am curious and I have been wanting to look into this more.
Sure.
I have a very negative view on the church. Is that necessarily something that has to be a part of your faith, or can you build on your faith without the church? And are you frowned upon for seeking your own way without outsiders' guidance?
Two questions. When you say church, do you mean established religion, or do you mean a Christian church? Because we are kind of in the context of Christian and whatever I am.
What are you?
I mean, if you want to boil down my faith and what I've learned, it is Christianity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I got you.
So yeah.
So it's kind of in that context. Yeah. Okay. Mm-hmm. Personally, I think that going your own way is it.
Because you got to admit, there's so much corruption. In so many different religions and churches and groups that... So
here's the trade-off, in my opinion, is I noticed the corruption too. I found out about the Catholic scandals and I was like, I can't... That's way too corrupt for me. How the Catholic Church still has one follower, much less over 1 billion worldwide, is beyond me at this point. But I think it's because... So we're kind of born in a state of ignorance about this sort of thing, which is why there's churches to kind of help bring you to light about this. Mm. I think it's a double-edged sword. So if you go your own way, you're not gonna face any form of corruption, save for how corrupted you are internally as an individual. But if you're honest with yourself, and that really is one of the pursuits of spirituality, is to be honest with yourself, to be an honest being as close to the divine as you can. But you don't have guidance. I've had so many questions about so many things that I know that there's some yogi in India or some monk in Tibet that would have the beautiful answer for this question. But, I'm not part of that. I'm not in that culture. I don't go to the Western churches here. Mm-hmm. I sort of have to kind of, when I see a parable and it seems to address my question, I'm like, all right, I'm going to consider that. I have to sort of kind of pick and choose where I get my feeds from. Whereas when you're part of a church, when you're part of an organization or a group, there is that guidance. You have people around you that you can ask. Like you said, your dad was a big influence and a big guide for you in terms of your spiritual life, and I think it's a great thing. However, being part of whatever organization you might be part of, there is always that risk of corruption.
I'm curious what you have to say.
Yeah, go ahead, man.
I actually had a similar situation when I was in college. I became very disillusioned with the church as a whole, just organized religion. I felt betrayed by something that had happened to me, and I was just completely put off from ever really going back. But I met some really awesome people, and I gave it a chance again. And it's been years of a process. Like I'm still working my way back into getting back involved with that community, and not trying to look at every single person in a point of leadership as this corrupt influence.
Do you still have walls up as you're? Is that what you're trying to do? Is break down those those walls? But at the same time, for me, I've got to be skeptical, and I've got to make sure that these same things over the years that I've witnessed and seen, I don't become a part of.
No, exactly, and I can guarantee you, not every church is like that.
Which I know we're all different. So even groups of people.
But I mean, there's corruption everywhere, and I'm truly sorry that happened to you. I can't even imagine.
Well, whatever. That's the fucked up thing, man. The most fucked up part for me for that story is just the repression. Like the fact that when you were and then it goes fuzzy, and
well, I will say
most people don't have the cognition of it going fuzzy. It kind of just I just don't remember after that. But for you, you're nope, everything's fuzzy, and then I was at home.
And I was confused. I mean, that's why I know, because it was confusion afterwards, and then followed by depression and acting out. And
there was
hatred
something happened
toward God. I did have hatred toward God.
Yeah, something happened.
Yeah.
Something happened. Not to really remark on your story, but
if it is any comfort to you, even in Scripture it says that those that are in positions of leadership are actually judged more harshly. So
really,
wow. So if you are in a position of authority within a church body, whether you're a teacher, a pastor, then you actually are held to a much higher standard. So it's people that decide to go into their own ministries, or people that want to go into a point of leadership. They're taking a lot more responsibility on spiritually as well. So people that misuse their authority, they're judged much more harshly. And
that's actually kind of comforting to know.
Yeah, it is for me.
It's comforting to know that that's part of the tradition, is that those who accept the mantle of God's emissary on earth, or something akin to that.
Representatives.
There we go, a representative. It's good to know that there is you're taking on this mantle, you better not fuck up, boy.
Yeah.
You better, trying to watch my language.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I mean, it's a personal thing for me, but I kind of like the picture, I like the picture of Jesus as more of a hippie. Buddy Christ. But kind of more of a hippie, where it's just very peaceful, very chill, and then the minute somebody's you need to pay your taxes and give tithes, man, fuck you, dude. Just trying to live and be good, But that's extremely sacrilegious, and I won't get into that.
I mean, a lot of people forget that Jesus actually was flipping tables in churches about the I forget, it was tax collectors, or I think it was more the idea of
Wasn't it offering
indulgences, stuff like that?
Was it indulgences?
Yeah.
I thought it was interest on loans that was being collected in the church.
That would make sense too.
I forgot exactly what it was, but I know what you're talking about, because it was in it was in one of the Gospels where it was just.
This really resonates with me, because and it makes sense, because when you are given that position, you do have a larger responsibility to not use your power maliciously, in order to either. What I was talking about with the church, giving my parents a hard time for not contributing, because they were trying to better their life, and they weren't able to at the time. I feel like that's a you're using your power in a corrupt way.
Yeah, I would agree.
So it was a very disgusting act that they did that. I can't believe that anyone. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I mean. And that's the thing, man, is from your established religious circles, I think that's why people get disillusioned with them. Because you have to think, you brought up the different sects of Christianity, and there's over 30,000 sects of Christianity, and with so many, gives so many different branches and types of corruption to be, and so that's why there might be this overall perception that the Christian church is extremely corrupt. Again, I can't bring it back enough to the Catholic Church on how how they still have a following. I just don't understand that.
Not the best PR there.
No, they have amazing PR because they have fucking followers. That's the craziest thing. Is it's like,
I mean, like the people outside of Catholicism.
Oh yeah. That's the thing.
How likely are you to come across? Because you said there are not every church and group is the same. How, at this point in time, how likely are you to actually find that instead of going into people who are abusing that authority? It doesn't seem like it's as likely.
Coin toss.
Yeah, exactly.
That's how it seems to be for me, because it's wherever you walk in, it might happen, it might not. I don't know. Like, there's probably statistics. I bet what you could do is what you would have to do is establish a parameter for religious corruption. So you would actually have to establish what that is. And then you could take different churches within one religion and then different religions and their sects and see how many instances of corruption there are in either of them. And then you'd have to cross-analyze them with their geographic and cultural region. Or their geographic region, their cultural region or affiliation. So like ours would be Western culture, Texan Western culture or something like that. And also age group of the religious leaders within the community. That'd be you could do it, but it would be a matter of establishing what qualifies as religious corruption. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So like I think the Catholic Church is the gold standard for religious corruption. We're going to mess with kids and then take the priests out of the jurisdiction of the local law enforcement and shelter them until the statute of limitations.
Yeah, statute of limitations.
Until that's up, and then put them back in. Or shuffle them around to another precinct or something like that. I don't know. That's goofy. There was a point brought up that has to do with the teleology of everything. And you brought up redemption. Mm-hmm. And you said how the Christianity is, by and large, focused on redeeming mankind for an inherent guilt or sin that we have. And in that respect, it's the I would call the eating of the apple pride.
There's a lot of speculation as to excuse me, what it actually was. I mean, for many years they were like, "Oh, they ate the apple, the tree of knowledge of good and evil." But I mean, there was so far the most recent one that I came across that I was kind of interested in. I have no idea if it was actually the case or not, but it postulates that the actual first sin might have been something of a sexual nature.
We've had this conversation.
Go ahead. Because I mean, frankly,
it's the most curious fruit that is presented to us, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, at that point in time, like there was no need for sexual gratification. At least, I mean, the scriptures don't allude to anything of that sort. But I mean, you look at the because like Eve was the one who ate it first, and you look at her punishment, and it was to suffer in childbearing after that. But at the same time, I mean, it's like with God being all-knowing, He knew it was going to happen, so He already had a plan in place. But there had to be a way to keep people around as well. So I mean, I don't know. It was just an interesting point that could be the case. I'm not entirely sure what it was, but I mean,
I have a bit of an idea on the eating of the apple. So the original sin was in fact eating the apple. Correct? That's how we could phrase it, right? It's a consummatory impulse, so it's consumption. Everything was perfect in Eden, so they didn't need to eat, right?
And then came capitalism.
Also, capitalism's evil. That's interesting coming from you, Mr. Conservative.
Joking.
But if you look at eating the apple, it psychologically it's a consummatory behavior.
Yeah.
So you have to think of your stages of development. Mm-hmm. So you're when you're an infant, when you're infantile, everything is sensory motor. Mm-hmm. Everything is sensory motor. You touch it, and you move to see how you move in the dimensions of three-dimensional space, and then you pick shit up to see how it feels. Is it hot? Is it cold? Does it hurt me? Is it smooth? You just do all that kind of stuff. But then there's a very interesting thing that happens with babies. Around 18 months, they start putting every goddamn thing in their mouth.
I mean, Yes.
But to further the point,
yeah.
Adam and Eve were the first people, and they didn't have an infantile form.
I would say the first living souls. Yes.
So the first because we could get into the Enoch book and the angels that came before and all of that. But let's say first human people. Yeah.
Yeah.
So they didn't have an infantile form. They were made as adults. Mm-hmm. Well, they still, psychologically speaking, they still seem to be going through the stages of infantility. Mm-hmm. They're very curious. They have the why phase, Yeah. And that came actually before, if you look at it, they were asking God about things.
Yeah.
But they started out in the Garden of Eden, just kind of looking around, checking things out. It doesn't go into detail a lot, but you can kind of fill in the gaps of what... They weren't in Eden for as long as it takes you to read the first book of Genesis. Or the first chapter of Genesis.
It doesn't really speculate how long they were there.
Well, that's the thing, is it's kind of a timeless frame, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they could have been there an eternity, they could have been there 8 minutes. Really... But my point being is that it starts out, they're just sort of looking and speaking with God, asking of the curiosities. A sensory motor stage where they're kind of just looking at things, picking them up. What's this? What's that? What does that do? And then there comes a point, well, I know that an apple's smooth. Mm-hmm. I know that it's round. I know it weighs about, half a pound. I can throw it up. Me and Adam can chuck it back and forth. Why don't I put it in my mouth? You look at it from just a purely psychoanalytic perspective. Mm-hmm. Why don't I put it in my mouth and see what it does in my mouth?
It kind of goes back to what you were talking about pride, because originally God told them you can eat of anything you can or that you want in the garden except that. And then the serpent came and told them, well, why did God say you can't eat this thing? Oh, surely he didn't say that. Well, it's because he knows that if you eat it, you'll become like him. You'll know good and evil. But what God spoke true was that you will surely die. And that was the
spiritual... It was like a spiritual death,
okay.
Your connection, your direct line to God dies.
Because God is the source of life, the source of eternity that they had a connection to, and by disobeying him in that regard, that connection was severed, and that's why they were kicked out of the garden. And ever since then, if you look at the Old Testament, each book, everything, it's all a prophecy leading up to the coming of Jesus, the coming of the Messiah. That's what the Bible's all about, and it all points to him.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting that you brought up the eating of the apple, and then I'm like, it's a consummatory behavior, because I watched the Peterson lectures on Genesis, it was, I think, 12 or 15 of them, and I watched the majority of them. I think I watched 12. If there's 15, I watched 12. If there's 12, I watched 12. I watched 12 of the fucking things, and he talks about looking at these stories from a psychology perspective, from a psychoanalytic perspective. And if you notice, as the Bible goes on, as civilization goes on, you can kind of track these sort of behavioral and developmental milestones within humanity. So the early phases, God is even in the Old Testament, God is a rather angry being. He's very vengeful, spiteful. Listen to me. Don't do that. Do this. Don't do that kind of stuff. Whereas in the New Testament, he's a little bit more kind of laissez-faire. I saw what happened when I tried to control everything, so I give humans ultimate free will. But there's this sort of psychological progression of the species. I had a question, though. I wrote this down a while ago, but conversation was so fluid. Christians aren't the only ones concerned with redemption. It actually is there's a lot of feelings of guilt or inadequacy or a negative spin on the human condition. Even Buddhism is good for this. Buddhism is their fundamental thing is human life is characterized by suffering. So the ultimate purpose is to overcome suffering. That's the ultimate purpose. Mm-hmm. And so this kind of goes to the teleology, back to, we haven't gone even to the next one. We're still sort of in the vein of teleology of just the purpose of everything. That feeling, Christians characterize it as redemption, overcoming original sin. Muslims too, if I'm not mistaken.
The key difference, though, being not by our own means, though.
Yeah. That's very true. Yeah. Whereas Buddhism is more no, how you overcome suffering is by literally letting go. You have to be your own person, and that's it. Like, you have to be true to who you are. And actually, earthly attachment is the root of suffering in a Buddhist context. So, I mean, that's why you've seen the harsh stories. Something horrible, like horrifying, happened to me that I vividly remember, and it's like the Buddhist will say, yeah, I mean, you kind of attach yourself to that moment, and you'll stop suffering when you stop attaching yourself to whatever that was, which is a harsh reality. It's very, very, very harsh reality. It's very harsh, but it's consistent.
So is the harsh realities of what I discussed and what other people go through.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's exactly it. And the one thing, here's the one difference that I can say between Buddhism and Buddhism doesn't have a god. Like, there's not a god. There are some sects of Buddhism that they deify Buddha into this godlike being, and to me that just seems very inconsistent. It just seems